This, to me, is one of the most important topics today, which is the future and what's going on in science. You know, basic science is the foundation of everything we do in health, medicine, technology, and it gets shortchanged for a lot of reasons we'll talk about. We're privileged today. I have three people on the panel who literally are three of my heroes. Sue Hellman, to my right. Sue Desmond Hellman used to be president of Genentech. She is a remarkable physician, scientist, leader who's now CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who we were just talking, we met in the mid-1990s when we were children, and actually worked together on a drug that is now on the market helping women with breast cancer. Peggy Hamburg, who is the new head of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. All those A's kind of screw you up a little bit. And is former commissioner of the FDA and truly a transformative leader in healthcare. And Lloyd Minor, who is the dean of the Stanford University Medical School and has led their precision medicine and really pioneered a program to try to bring precision medicine to the daily practice of medicine. So when we talk about science, most people's eyes glaze over. Science is not something that is brought up. Medicine is brought up, health, other things, but science is not exciting. Why is that? Why isn't it every child wanting to be a scientist today?
Because we make it boring. We start when kids are young, especially girls, talking about science as if it's books and tests and boring. It's one of the things I love most about global health. If you want to get kids or students excited about science, talk to them about children dying and how science can keep kids from dying before they're 1 year old, before they're 1 day old. That changes from something that I'm furrowing my brow, trying to remember, maybe boring, to something like, I want to learn more. I want to hear how I can help other people. I think it's how we talk and how we think about science that furrows everyone's brow.
It's interesting. Peggy, you know, right now we're taught biology, chemistry, physics, each distinct disciplines, but obviously the world has them merged or converged. Can we change education?
Well, we certainly need to change everything about how we work, how we live, how we think about health and disease, and education is a big part of that. Yeah, I think we have to look across and realize that all of the problems before us, big and small, have complexities that require working across boundaries, whether they're disciplinary boundaries or sectoral boundaries or, you know, national boundaries. And I think, you know, the way we teach things, I mean, Sue said, you know, we do a pretty good job making science boring. We also, you know, make it, you know, this hour you do this, that hour you do that, next hour you do this. You don't relate the things. And certainly for me, when I went to medical school, which, by the way, I did not enjoy, I think medical school has gotten a lot better. But, you know, for 2 years, we sat in a classroom, and we were lectured at, and we memorized things. We forgot them, and we memorized them again. But there was no linkage made to what we were studying really had to do with taking care of patients. And for me, that big disconnect, you know, almost, you know, really made me not want to continue in medicine. And for lots of reasons, I went on to do other things anyway. But I think we need to integrate.
Lloyd, you know, obviously, you know, we're taught to, as you alluded to, memorize this bone, this muscle, everything in the body, and anatomy and physiology. It's memorization. In today's world, I could take my iPhone out and look up anything. And as a patient, you probably want me to do that and not rely on my memory to do things.
Or your little index card.
Yeah. It's true. We used to carry around index cards in our pocket, you know, as an intern, and you would look up everything, talk about the patients.
Microscopic writing.
Right. And you write as small as you can, everything on one card. Can we change education to make it about actually knowledge and thinking and empathy?
Absolutely, and you know, you can get those flashcards electronically now. There's some companies that focus on that. I think we have to re-envision medical education. I think we are doing that, and also view medical education as a continuum. It doesn't end with medical school or residency, but continues throughout, you know, the practicing lifespan of a physician and other healthcare professionals. And also, I think all of us in biomedicine need to learn more about how to communicate what we do with the public. Michael Spector, science writer for The New Yorker, has remarked that, you know, we should be giving talks at Rotary clubs and Kiwanis clubs, not in Palo Alto or Cupertino, but in Kansas City and Wichita. And I think there's a lot more we can be doing and need to do about communicating what science has brought to society, to health and society. I do think, though, and Mark Bertolini brought this point up in the discussion that he just had a few minutes ago in this conference, that we also deal with this very vexing problem of the loss of hope among large proportions of young people today. And that's something that just education alone is not going to address. I think it's much more fundamentally at a societal level that we have to relook at how we reinvigorate the social contract with people in the country.
In Hollywood High School, there's a sign above the science lab, and it says, "Science is truth found out." And you know, if you think about it, it's a very profound statement, but is it true?
It is true. One of the things I love most about science is public health. I love public health because it's inclusive, it's powerful, it helps more people than virtually anything else I've experienced as an innovator, as a product developer. And you use statistics and inference, to use a fancy word, in public health. Everything about those statistics, everything about that inference is about predicting what truth really is. And so it is, it's so compelling when you're learning new things to say, eureka, we now know truth. The best scientists are always using the scientific method, which is, this is truth as of right now. Truth can change and evolve. And I think that that's one of the things about science communication that is the most challenging. If Peggy knows this because of Food and Drug Administration. When I worked with Food and Drug Administration and you and I worked on new cancer remedies, it would be, is this drug safe and effective for breast cancer with these kinds of patients? That actually can change. That can change so that you knew a new side effect, or you had less or more confidence in it working, or there was a better drug that was more safe or more efficacious. What everyone in the world would like us to do is to say that truth is forever. It's truth as we best understand it today. And so that's not fraud. That's not wicked. That's science. But the fact that you're predicting truth for the best scientists makes you humble.
But there's so much noise in our space, right? Every day you read, you know, something and it's counter to something else. And that noise just makes people turn off. And in order to get this normative change, you need leadership. And we don't have lots of leadership in our space, right? When the greatest healthcare leader over the last decade is the former mayor of New York City, you know there's a problem with what we all do. And obviously, you know, you saw it, you know, at the FDA, people making claims right and left without data behind it. How do we provide guidance in this sea of noise?
Well, I think there are a couple aspects to this that are important. One is that, as Sue was saying, science is a dynamic process, and you establish an understanding based on the best available evidence at that time. But you do need to always be questioning, and in that process, science changes. And for some people, especially in a world where the media, you know, jumps on, you know, headlines, this is the cure, this is you know, don't eat this, eat that, you know, and then the next week it's, well, maybe that's not quite right. The public starts to be suspicious and distrust science because they feel like, you know, yesterday you told us this and now you're telling us that. So we need to work on the understanding of the scientific process, that people, you know, really understand that it is dynamic, and the notion of hypothesis testing and evidence generation. You know, in addition, you never have all the data that you want to make a decision, and that's always a challenge. But we do need people who are advocates for science. We do need people that can go out to Wichita or, you know, go to New York City. We still have work to do there, and explain why science matters and how it's making a difference in people's lives every day, so they can make better choices for health, so they can understand the technology that underlies so much of modern life, et cetera. By the way, I'm having problems even signing on to the app for the schedule for this meeting, so I'm one to talk. But you know, I think there's that fundamental disconnect in terms of people sort of appreciating and understanding the science in their lives, and then why we need science and technology to address the most pressing problems before us in the modern era, whether it's health and disease or poverty or climate change in the environment or you know, the future of our civilization. Science and technology really matters.
So I get it for translational science. I think the public gets it. But do we need basic science?
Absolutely. I think because everything
that was a leading
really,
question.
That is a softball, but no, I would hope absolutely. You know, good translational science comes from great fundamental discovery-based science, and some of those impactful advances in medicine have come from discoveries made not with the intent of having impact in medicine, but with the intent of really understanding the way a biological system, with the ultimate evolution being a human, the way a biological system works. And we've never been at a better time to do fundamental discovery-based research than today. The advances in technology, biology in particular, has always made leaps beyond increments with the introduction of new technologies, and those technologies are more abundant today, and their transformation is more impactful today than ever before. And also, biology and medicine today are firmly quantitative disciplines, which they weren't as recently as 15, 20 years ago. So now people from more quantitatively focused disciplines like engineers, computer scientists, chemists are focusing on biological and biomedical problems because they're amenable to the type of science that they've learned and that they know how to do and that they now feel they can do most impactfully in biomedicine. So at our institution at Stanford, for example, over a third of the faculty in engineering, and not just bioengineering, but all the departments in engineering school, over a third are doing research related to biomedicine, not because anyone's told them they have to research biomedical problems, but because that's where their interests have been drawn based upon the impact that they think they can have. So there's never been a better time to do fundamental discovery-based research. And also, though, I fear that the challenges to doing that, both the skepticism about its value and the difficulties in finding funding to pursue that research, have also only increased with time.
You know, science is very hierarchical. You have to move up the food chain until you can start to really make an impact in most places. And you know, I can graduate Stanford tomorrow and have a startup and be CEO and lead it, but it takes me a decade before I can be a PI on a grant, et cetera. How do we change that? How do we let the young generation have impact sooner?
Well, I think there's a number of different ways. The first way is to recognize that by its very nature, science shouldn't be exclusive. One of the best experiences I've had since being at Gates Foundation was talking to a farmer, Patricia, in Malawi, who showed me how she was growing her maize to avoid aflatoxin and how she stored her crops so that they wouldn't mold. And if you could hear her, she was better than any scientist I know at describing how to keep her food healthy. I mean, we throw around food biosecurity. She knew what she was doing. She was talking like a scientist. That's the ability to have citizen science is vastly underrated. And I would encourage anybody who cares about science to experience things outside of the walls of the United States, literally. You see the best notions of science in people using it and experiencing it every day. Today, the way that we have formal science, getting a PhD, getting a master's degree, I don't think that's going to stick around, because getting your first R01 grant, your first big grant from NIH at 42, I think it is not sustainable. But the ways we try and do it is we have things like Grand Challenges grants. We have grants that encourage people to do science no matter where they come from, high-risk science, where you don't have to prove what you're going to prove before you can get a grant. Inventing new ways for people to access science and access leadership in science, no matter who they are or how old they are. I don't think we're for long the way we're doing it now.
You know, what Sue is referring to is that when you apply for an NIH grant, most of the time you've done half the work and you have the answers when you apply for it. And that makes you more likely to get it. And you can't really take risk. You know, one of the problems that scientists face, I think, is publishing, right? There are a dozen or 24 great journals, and then everything else is kind of an afterthought that doesn't really, make the impact the great journals do. And, once something is published, it's there in the public record forever. Whereas, as you alluded to, science changes. So I can go back 30 years and find anything I want and say, hey, there's a paper that shows it, even though it's been disproven, because it's static. Yet in today's world, where many of you have technologies that make the dynamism happen in every other business, we haven't changed ours. And we still have this system where these journals, and by the way, you have to pay. If I want to see your paper, most of the time I have to pay to be able to see your paper, even though the government funded your research. How do we change it to get young kids and allow citizen science, or allow somebody to put something that happened experience out there so we can all learn from it and move forward instead of backwards?
I do think this is a really complicated question, because you want to have published science reflect good analytics and reliable data, but you do want it to be available. You don't, number one, want it to be restricted for long periods of time when that knowledge could make a difference in people's lives and advancing science overall. And also, you certainly don't want it to be the situation where you have to pay to get access, et cetera. And we want more openness and transparency of sharing of data and learning. We also, I think, importantly, want to also be able to learn from failure. And very few studies that have failed, get published in Science or Nature. Yet that is some of the most important science at the end of the day, because not only does it give you insights into the underlying scientific processes, but it also prevents other people from spending a lot of time repeating failure rather than learning from failure and advancing knowledge and understanding. So I think these issues about publication are really, really important. I don't think they're completely straightforward. Then you can bring in the question of tenure and how does publication sort of shape the kinds of science that are done, and in the process, are we omitting important areas of science because they aren't sort of sexy or tenurable kinds of research? And I think that is a big gap. And from my perspective, really, really critical aspects of science aren't being adequately funded, aren't being adequately rewarded, and as a result are underdeveloped in terms of the opportunity.
Well, thank you. I want to open it to questions to the audience. Dr. Barker.
So, thank you. That was that's you're in my wheelhouse. One thing that's happened, I think, over the last several years in science is we've all become so specialized. I can tell you that the biologists in any given room, the biologists that actually know very much or remember very much about their physics or their computation, are very, very few. And today, we're moving toward a totally computational-oriented world, and we don't have people trained. I can tell you something like the Cancer Genome Atlas, we had maybe 30 people that could actually analyze that data. It's very much like what we've done in medicine. You go, God help you, you've got a heart attack, you have a GI problem, well, you're going to have to go to 6 other people. So how do we get out of this specialization of science and back to convergence of science in a way that really educates our young people? Because we're not educating them, we're making specialists of them. And I think it's a problem. And I can tell you, I work a lot with the Chinese. They don't do that. They're actually trying to, and I come from a university, by the way. We have no departments. We're organized around societal problems, as Sue knows, I think.
Dr.
So
Meyer,
how do we fix this?
what do you think?
Expert.
Sure. I agree with you. I think we need more physicians who are data scientists, and we need to, and I think we and others are, looking carefully at our medical school curriculum. You know, we have at Stanford medical students in their first and second years, because we follow the calendar of the rest of the university, who are taking, you know, courses in computer science and statistics. So they're not just restricted to medical school courses, and also providing the opportunities even after medical school to have further training experiences that get people fluent, literate, and able to interact with constructively with people who are experts in data science, and in the types of approaches that you so well described are needed in order to really mine the data that exists today and translate that data into actionable information. And that's a big gap right now. The gap, there are 2 gaps in being able to leverage the power of the data today. One is getting the data in, particularly for data that's trapped in electronic health record systems, which tend to still be siloed. And the other is the analytics needed to really glean information from those vast amounts of data.
Another question.
Hi, Laurie Glimsher from Dana-Farber and Harvard. So David, I was horrified by your question. Do we still need basic science? Do you know how cisplatin was discovered?
Sorry.
It was discovered by Barney Rosenberg, who was a bacteriologist who wasn't even thinking about cancer, because he was looking at why bacteria lose their shape or turn into different shapes. And he figured out that it was something in the fluid after he gave them an electromagnetic field. He purified the substance, it was cisplatin. And then he teamed up with biologists and with clinical trialists, and that's how cisplatin occurred. So, you know, without basic science, there's nothing to translate.
So I love that, and I'm going to pile on because I so agree with Lori. One of the most promising mosquito zappers we have right now is something called Wolbachia. And the details aren't important, but Wolbachia were discovered through someone studying the microbiome of insects. Now, if you think that's not basic, the microbiome of insects can now be exploited to help people fight off dengue, Zika, a lot of diseases you don't want to get. So the world needs basic science more than ever.
But this is really a critical moment to try to explain that to the public and policymakers, because there really is an eagerness to discount the importance of fundamental science, to question the investment of the federal government in fundamental science. And if the federal government doesn't fund it, I don't know who's going to.
And I would just add that I think we're all very fortunate to now have a generation, particularly of young philanthropists, who increasingly are seeing the importance of fundamental discovery-based research and who are providing transformative support for that research. But that alone won't do it.
No, listen, I thank you all for this panel, and I am obviously an enormous believer in the power of basic science. What I think we fall short on, and I think all of us are guilty, is we have to talk more about it. And we have to get that message out there, and we have to tell the stories about it. When you tell a story about, well, this basic science serendipity's led to X, Y, and Z, it's hard to convince them to put their resources behind serendipity. But I do think we have to start to keep telling the stories. Basic science changed the world from Edward Jenner on up, And I think that we have to be the message to make it continue. And we have to change education. We have to have professional societies that actually make it encouraging for young people to go into it. And obviously, we have foundations that at the same time are allowing it to change the world, not just locally, but globally. I thank the panelists, and I thank you all for listening.